Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at the market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Akin Sawyerr. He is the Africa lead over at Decred. We're going to take a look at blockchain and emerging technologies in Africa. It's great to have you with us, Akin. And welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at the market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Akin Sawyerr. He's the Africa lead over at Decred. We're going to take a look at blockchain and emerging technologies in Africa. Akin, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
At market site, in your background as an entrepreneur, you've operated in mobile money, remittances, payments in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a very different operating environment than what you might see in the US or in Europe. And because of that, politics and economics, they're turning to crypto now.
Yep, exactly.
So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in the African markets, there are lots of things that are quite different from the Western world. Financial inclusion is a big issue. So the majority of Africa is underbanked or unbanked, right, to the tune of as much as 80% of the people, right? So if you think about just access to financial services, there's a dearth of it. And with crypto and crypto platforms, it's now creating access to these markets where before it was either too expensive or the infrastructure just wasn't in place for those financial services to reach the majority of Africans.
All right, now governance is a big part of that as well, because the opportunity certainly is there with emerging technologies and 80% growth. That's certainly something that anyone would want to achieve for, but governance certainly has to be in play when you're looking at cryptocurrency and decentralized finance, whether it's Africa or anywhere else.
Yeah, that's correct, right? So we think that, regardless of what you're running or what network, governance exists. It's just a matter of if it's explicit or if it's sort of hidden behind certain structures are a little bit opaque to the public. And we believe at Decred that governance should really be at the heart of a network as it grows, right? The rules of the game have to be clear. How it's governed and how various stakeholders can participate has to be explicit, right? And we think that, with that transparency and clarity as to how the rules and decisions are made, that it makes for a project to kind of have longevity and actually accrue more value over time.
Because the technology is out there, it exists, but you're not going to get that mass institutional adoption until there's some standardization and regulation around these kinds of products, because the potential certainly is there.
Yeah, certainly, right? So if you think about anything that exists in the world, right, whether it's companies, governments, and it's not going to be any different for crypto, governance is really a value add, right? There's a reason why certain companies have higher valuations on the Nasdaq than others. And a lot of it goes back to how it's governed, right? How clear they are able to report their revenues and things of that nature. And I think in the crypto space, it's going to be it's similar as well, right? People will begin to realize that governance is important. They'll begin to see the difference between governance across various networks. And I think value would accrue to the networks that have, frankly, the best governance. That also includes a way for people to participate in the networks.
Yeah, we've seen this come together with the major stock exchanges in sub-Saharan Africa. So again, the potential is there. Are there specific regions that are doing better than others or that you're targeting?
So we're kind of taking a very broad view first of the continent and trying to really better understand what the reg framework is in different markets and what the opportunity is, broadly, right? So part of the challenge you have in Africa, across all sectors is a governance issue. Right, in terms of how the nations are governed, how companies and institutions are governed, what's the nature of corporate governance, and where you have a lack of just clear governance structures, you're paying a huge tax, right? In terms of, without information and clarity, it's going to stem how quickly investments can come in and take advantage of investment opportunities, right? And so we believe that at Decred, that as we grow and mature our governance setup, that will actually be of value into low trust environments like Africa, where you can now establish decentralized autonomous entities right on the blockchain that have a native currency which underlies the economy, but also a very mature governance framework that would then allow African markets to be a lot more open, right? Because now you can trust in the network, you can trust that the rules are clear and explicit, and I think that would bring more capital into the continent.
Yeah, I think that's really key because in the US we have 50 states, but we're synonymous. In Africa you have 54 different countries with 54 different types of governance systems in place. So I think what you were saying before on the blockchain, that certainly does help to legitimize it. And to wrap up here, let's just talk about global trends in general when it comes to digital currency. Where do you see it? Where's the cross-section between big tech, the banks, and the regulators?
So I think globally you kind of have to kind of chop it up by region. When we look at the advanced markets in the world, you have lots of incumbents, you have fairly financial inclusive societies, and access to financial services is really not that difficult if you have collateral, if you have good credit, right? in emerging markets and in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, a lot of those building blocks that exist and we take for granted here in the United States or in Europe don't exist, right? So people don't even have identities ubiquitously. You don't have credit scoring. You don't have all the things that will allow you to assess if someone or something or some entity is a good investment risk, right? And so we believe that because of that, advances in crypto will actually accrue more value in emerging markets for a couple of reasons. One, that's where the biggest opportunity is. And two, you have less incumbents kind of standing in the way, right? You have less, mature banks, less regulators that actually have a handle of these informal markets. And we think that's where crypto is going to shine, because as the technology matures and it now penetrates this informal markets, it'll digitize them, right? And it'll bring them onto the world stage such that they can transact globally. And I think that's going to be a big revolution in terms of how markets and financial services develop across Africa.
I, for one, am excited for the next decade. Akin, thank you so much for joining us at MarketSite. And
Thanks
thank you for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.